Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Will Kern from Endless Events, and I'm joined by the lovely Donna Brighton. Donna is a pro when it comes to leadership and change management within companies. We're going to be talking a little bit about how we can apply this today and from every single level. You don't have to be, C-level, you don't have to be mid-management, you can be just starting out entry level. We're going to talk a lot about how you can take leadership to that next level and also be ready for some change as well. So,
Excellent.
Donna, you got an awesome program here with MPI,
Yes.
and I want to know what should people know? What's the tips that people should take away when it comes to creating some leadership? So, I want to know the thing that we talked about a little bit before we got in the interview was about how can someone know what leadership is, and I think you have an amazing concept around leadership and how people define it. Can you talk a little bit about
Fabulous, thank you. Absolutely. So here was something really interesting. I actually got a master's degree in organizational leadership.
Awesome.
And we read a ton of books, did lots of research. I love the topic of leadership. And the fascinating thing was there's a lot of books, millions of them, and there's not one agreed upon definition of what leadership is, right?
And why is that?
There's servant leadership, authentic leadership, and the reason I believe that's true is because each one of you is unique. So you're as unique as I am, and what leadership is to you is different than what it might be to me.
I love that, and I think that carries on very well this concept of different levels have different levels of leadership. So when it comes to someone defining their leadership, do you have any sort of tips and tactics for someone for how they can kind of discover what leadership means to them?
Absolutely. So the first question I would have for anyone who's thinking about moving into leadership, or if you are already in a leadership position, is ask yourself the question, why? Why do you want to be a leader? What is your leadership intent? So are you interested in just moving up the career ladder because maybe you want to think about it a little bit more deeply? Do you want to change the world? Do you want to make a difference for your team? Why do you want to be a leader? Start there. The next thing you want to do is pause and think about what leadership means to you. Because, like I said, it can mean something different to everyone. And when you're clear on your definition of leadership, that means now you have kind of a guide that helps you as you are moving along your leadership path. And this is true. This defining leadership is relevant at any level.
I love it. So I think for anyone who's maybe like, oh, well, I'm struggling with this activity of defining what that leadership means to me.
Yes.
To give people an example, do you mind defining what leadership means to you?
I don't. And the thing that would be really helpful, so I have a kind of a construct that I use.
Please share.
And that is, so what is leadership to you? Right? And there's lots of different definitions. So kind of scroll through them and kind of say, yes, this is really true for me. For me personally, leadership is about an influence relationship. Because if I'm just telling you to do something and you do it, then I'm bossing you. I'm not really leading you.
Totally.
And in today's world, we need people who influence for good. So my desire in leadership is helping my team realize the best of who they are. Like really paying attention to the strengths in each individual team member and finding ways to bring that out in the work that they do. And that's my passion and definition of leadership. And then I live that out through the work that we do together, which is around the conversation of leadership. So the work that we do is helping make leadership and shifting the conversation around leadership so that you can be the best leader you can be and everyone else can be the best leader they can be.
Very cool. I'm going to throw you a curveball question.
Yes.
So a lot of times, like you kind of defined leadership, it has to do with working with other people.
True.
But as we all know, not everyone loves to work with other people, right? You might be more introverted, may want more task-oriented. How can someone who's more task-oriented and more introverted, I'd say, become a leader?
Okay, well, here's the interesting thing. Personally, I don't believe you can be a leader if you don't have followers. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that you have to be managing a large team. There's other ways that you can have influence and people follow you. But I would say if you're introverted, one of the first things you can do is lead yourself. And what does that mean? Well, have you paused and are you living according to the ideals that you have? Are you achieving the goals that you want to? Because why should anybody be led by you if you can't lead yourself?
So true. That's so true. It starts with yourself.
Yes.
Very much so. And,
Yes.
focusing on, like being good at what you do, or focusing on the project that you're working on, and
Yes.
then work through that as well. That's awesome. So then there's kind of this second part of it, which is the change management portion, right? And I think, like we were kind of talking about, you have to kind of become a leader before you can be ready for, I feel like, this change management stuff. So, with the industry always changing, right? I feel like the events industry changes like literally, if you blink, it's constantly changing, right?
Yes.
And companies are getting bigger, they're going smaller. They people are changing careers. Companies are evolving their offerings.
Yes.
What are your best tips for someone to work through? And in this case, let's say a company who is getting acquired by another company. That's seems very common in the events industry now.
It's happening a lot.
How can someone maybe work through that sort of change management?
Okay. So I'd like to start off with some clarity around the difference between change and transition.
Okay. Let's do that.
Yes, and change is the external thing that happens to you. So in the example you just gave, that is about, wow, my company just got acquired. In fact, in our session yesterday, one of the attendees, Ashley, had that exact situation, and she was really challenged by that. And the reality is that the change that happens externally is going to happen. The question is the internal piece, and that's transition. So how am I making peace with what's happening? And have you heard of the change curve?
No, tell us what the change curve is.
So the change curve is kind of that when the change happens, that external thing happens, you kind of go through this process of dealing with it, okay? And if you think of like a dip, any change you go through externally, and change can be good or bad, we're not putting a judgment on it. As you go through that change, it requires some learning, right? So for example, if you're being acquired, you all of a sudden have a new set of rules, right? Maybe some new processes you have to adopt. You have new leaders that you're working with. So the first thing you want to do is say, what is the change exactly? And the second thing I would ask, if you're personally being impacted by that change, what does success look like?
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So for you, you said we'll just play along and say you're working for a company, you just got acquired.
Let's do it.
Wow. Okay. So what does success look like here? So for you might say success for me is to work in a job where I do these things because this is what I love to do. And so you start exploring at that new merged company, is this still working? And you might say, wow, there's not an opportunity for me to do what I love to do best, and you give yourself permission to live your definition of success by finding an opportunity where you can put that to work. So, and I want to share something because a lot of times in change creates uncertainty and you start feeling fearful.
Yeah, fear for sure.
Yes. So take ownership of whatever the situation that's happening, because when you own it, you have strengths. Everybody has amazing capabilities and capacity within them. Own that. And instead of putting a label on yourself, like I'm an events manager or I'm a meetings coordinator or whatever your title is, put that away and stop and think, what makes me amazing? What are my strengths and how can I bring them forward in this transition?
Ooh, I like it. It's really cool because this aligns so well with like goal setting and planning and everything like that. And it feels like whenever there's change, in transition,
yes.
You seem to want to reset goals. Where am I going? I have to redo my bucket list, all these things like that. And I love the idea of focusing on what does success look like, because it's no longer just, hey, how can I, what am I going to do? It's more so like, what would make me happy? And I feel like that's a big part of it too. Is finding that happiness.
It's two things, because happiness is great, but usually happiness is a result. And it comes from us using our strengths and capabilities at our best and highest capacity, the best and highest application of them. So that's what happens a lot of times. People go through these transitions and they have to say, wow, is what used to be true still true?
Ooh, deep. Okay, I like it.
Right?
I like it. Okay, so as far as when it comes to change management, what other sort of tips do you have when it comes to that whole entire process that you want to share with our audience?
Well, we could probably be here for a couple more hours.
Literally hours. Because what you do teach is hours long. So, we definitely are trying to compact it down, but we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But
so a couple tips. If you're personally being impacted by it, understand, number one, change is a process, and the transition is a process, right? The change can happen. Like, boom, the company got acquired. but my making peace with that takes time. So that's the first thing. Secondly, is every person is impacted differently by that change. Okay, so I might feel really excited and you're going through that same transition and you're like, I'm not so happy about this, okay? And so there's not one right response to change, but it's a process, it's different for everybody. And then I wanna share one other really, really helpful point of awareness is that every person has capacity for change, okay? And it's not personal change or professional change, it's like change in general. So whether you just got married, or you had a baby, or you adopted a dog, like exciting changes, right? Or your company got acquired, or even you got a new job. That's all change that's happening and absorbs the capacity that you have. And so if you think about it, like a sponge, for example, that you have this sponge that absorbs a certain amount of change, and then you reach a point where there's more change than that sponge will absorb.
And then it leaks everywhere.
It leaks everywhere, and the most amazing, wonderful people move to dysfunction because they're overwhelmed by change. And so I share that because there are some people who they have so much going on in their life, they're off the stress charts. And it's not just about, I need to learn how to manage stress better. You need to understand there's times where you have more change than you have capacity for. And give yourself permission to recognize that. And then you have a couple options. I'm gonna say, number one, you can squeeze out that sponge, if you think of that as your capacity. And in squeezing it out, meaning like, I'm going to do less change. So maybe I was planning on moving, but I understand there's so much going on. I'm just gonna stay put for another year and then worry about moving because I can't deal with that much change right now. So that's one thing you can do if you're feeling overwhelmed. The other thing, and sometimes it's not just putting it off, but reprioritizing. Does all the change need to happen right now?
Can you delay it maybe?
Exactly. And the other thing you can do is some resilience practices.
Ooh, I like this. Okay, share us with the audience.
Yes. So resilience practices, if you're thinking of that internal sponge as your capacity to absorb, it's about growing the sponge. So how can you add practices that will help you become more resilient? And this is a really important thing because change management is dealing with the change as it's happening. Resilience is building capacity so when the change occurs, you're ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're probably wondering, what are some of those resilience practices?
Yeah, I want to know.
Well, there's a fantastic book by Sean Achor that walks through some of those. But as an example, one would be a gratitude practice, which sometimes people think it's a little woo-woo. And here's why that works.
It's amazing. I've done it before.
Okay, and what was your experience with it?
I mean, it definitely helps you stay laser focused on the things that matter.
Yes.
You find that, you think to yourself, things are going right now, but then you remember, I'm so happy to have a roof above my head,
yes.
to have a meal today, to
yes.
be at an amazing conference, whatever it may be.
Exactly. So what you just said is think about back to our person who's dealing with being acquired, right? Oh my gosh, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm so afraid. When you start focusing on the good and being grateful, completely shifts. Because did you know you can't have a negative, fearful thought in your head at the same time you're feeling gratitude?
That makes sense.
Isn't that cool?
That makes sense.
So that's just one of the examples. If you have a gratitude practice, exercise, meditate, do a kind act for somebody, those are all practices that will help you become more resilient because you've increased that sponge.
I like it. Well, anything else related to that? Because I know you said there's a couple different things about as far as empty the sponge or grow the sponge. Anything
right.
additional to that?
Well, you can keep having change happen, and the results usually aren't very good.
Totally. You can almost just acceptance then at that point too. But
yes.
let's hopefully you grow the sponge, or you empty the sponge before you decide to just accept it as it is.
Yes.
Is there any other tips that you want to leave with our audience?
So, oh my goodness, how to summarize it into just a few tips.
Just a couple tips.
Yes. Well, one of the things we talked about before was this idea of the relay race of change. And so this ties into the concept we just talked about with the change saturation. So my experience is that leaders, senior leaders, love change. It's one of the markers, I believe, of leaders is they like making change. Cool, shiny new object, let's grab it, right?
Sure. For sure. I'm guilty.
Okay, so as leaders are really excited about these changes, sometimes they don't always appreciate the impact further down in the organization. So I call that the relay race of change. And I'm sharing that with you because it can help leaders understand there's times where you need to pause, appreciate the level of change saturation in your organization, and step back. Because what happens in this relay race of change, again, imagine you're moving along as a leader, shiny object, grab it, hand it down, shiny object, right? And you just keep handing back those relay race batons, and pretty soon your organization's overwhelmed, and you're like, how come everyone's not keeping up? So for those in the organization, the tip is, how can you speak up to say we're at saturation? We can't absorb and do things with excellence if we don't pay attention to this.
I love it. I love it. And I think that's so great for leaders to be aware of that sort of thing because, I mean, my team knows I love software, and one of my favorite changes I love to throw at them is, hey, here's this new shiny object software to go check out. I learned, don't do the relay baton handoff. Sometimes you just got to be like, no, and decide not to do it.
And I'd love to share a tip on that.
Please.
Because you're excited. Oh, this software is going to be so fantastic. I can't wait. But remember I talked about everybody goes through that process differently, that transition. You've already made the transition because you're excited. I can't wait for this change to happen. But what leaders don't appreciate is not everybody shares that level of excitement because you've been thinking about that change before they have. So I actually worked with a CEO once who was like announcing a change, as you might have, right? Wow, look at this great new software. And then it was quiet. Have you ever had that happen?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, you're like, why? Everybody should be so excited. This is going to be fantastic. But the reality is they're just dealing with the, oh my gosh, what does this mean for me?
For sure, for sure. I love it. I love it. Donna, so tell me a little bit about, to kind of wrap up, a little bit about the awesome course that you kind of taught here at IMEX America with MPI at Smart Monday, correct?
Yes.
So can you tell a bit about that, and where can they go to learn more and to potentially maybe eventually take the full entire course?
Fantastic. Thanks for asking. So I actually did 2 sessions at Smart Monday, which were fantastically fun. The first we did on culture, creating a culture of inclusion. And specifically, we were focused on generations because one of the things I didn't realize until I started working with my co-author was that age is the #1 diversity issue in the workplace.
Ooh, okay, I like it.
All right, so surprising, which means like we all know you're not supposed to be prejudiced or say bad things against all this whole list of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's still okay to make fun of somebody older or younger than you are.
Ooh, so true. Very true. Very true.
Okay, but is that really okay?
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. Obviously not okay. But it's so funny. I mean, you don't think about it. I remember when I first started my company, I was young. I was 17 when I started my company.
Yeah.
I used to say ageism existed, that like people didn't want to work with me because I was young, or they wanted to work with me because I was young and things like that. But so true.
So true. So the whole point is if you're going to have an inclusive culture, you need to be open to working with everybody. So we talked about what are the components of creating an inclusive culture. And then, because everybody's an expert at culture, we all know understand culture, but what we don't understand is culture change. So what we did in the course was talk about the 3 key steps to success in creating culture change in developing an inclusive culture.
I love it. And then your second session.
Yes, the second session we called, Why Can't They Just Do What I Tell Them To?
I love it. Yeah, why won't they just adopt the software that I wanted?
Why don't they do it? Well, unfortunately, there's not a prescription for that.
Absolutely.
And so that's where we talked about some of those principles of change. And I would encourage everybody, there's lots of great resources, but change is more than just communicating, telling people about the change, or training them on it. There's a whole bunch more that goes into that. So educate yourselves, learn a little bit more about change management, and that will help you be more effective in the changes that you need to make.
Very cool. And where can people go to learn more about you and more about all the awesome things that you talked about?
Thanks for asking. Absolutely. So my website is Brighton, Brighton, BrightonLeadership.com. BrightonLeadership.com.
I love it. And then go to find all this information on
All
more
this
resources.
information.
Awesome. And
Yes.
you have 2 awesome books with you
I
as well that you
do.
have put together that you were kind of showing off.
Yes.
So I'll hold them up for you and then if you
Okay.
want to talk about real briefly what each of them is.
Sure. So this is Culturally Intelligent Change. And in my experience, you can do phenomenal change management, but if you're not paying attention to culture, that can help or hinder your culture or your change initiative. So we have a book here, 15 tips on that.
I love it. I love it. And it's quick reads for all of us.
Very
who are
quick.
All
Yes.
right, then the
For
secondary
attention
one.
challenged people.
You've been bouncing this on
Yes.
your lap much better than I can. All right. And the next one.
So this is the Flourishing Workplace, and this gets into some of the content I mentioned around generations. So we talked about generational differences, and fascinatingly enough, what one generation thinks about leadership is different than another. We explore that, we talk about the generational gifts, and we talk about key things you need to do to create a flourishing workplace where everybody brings their best to work.
Amazing. Donna, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for being on our interview. And we look forward to seeing more from you. And everyone can know to check down below for more links to all the awesome things that we talked about right here. And thank you again, Donna.